In the village of Abaka, beauty could bruise and strength wore a woman's face. Her name was Uku, and her fists were as legendary as her grace. In the heart of the village of Abaka, there lived a young woman whose name was whispered with both admiration and fear. Uku was her name, and her presence in the village was like a double-edged sword, a beauty so striking it could steal your breath, yet paired with a fierceness that could steal your courage. Nature had blessed Uku with the kind of beauty that made people stop in their tracks. Her eyes were bright and captivating, seeming to hold stories untold within their depths. Her skin was smooth as polished mahogany, glowing with a natural radiance that drew gazes wherever she went. Her beauty was the kind that inspired poets and made even the most eloquent speakers stumble over their words. Yet those who lived in Abaka knew that Yuku's beauty was but one facet of her character, and perhaps not even the most notable one. Where other young women in the village would gather at the marketplace, their laughter floating on the breeze like musical notes, Uku remained apart. Her face was always set in stern lines as if carved from stone, and no one could remember the last time they had seen her smile. The men of Abaka had learned to give Uku a wide berth, though many couldn't help stealing glances at her when they thought it was safe. Her hatred of men was as legendary as her beauty, and it manifested in ways that left lasting impressions, often quite literally. Those who dared to approach her, whether with romantic intentions or even innocent conversation, quickly learned the cost of their boldness. Tales circulated through the village of men who had tried their luck with Uku. Some spoke of black eyes and bruised ribs, others of wounded pride and hasty retreats. Young men who were new to the village would sometimes scoff at these warnings, believing their charm or status would make a difference. They would soon join the ranks of the humbled, nursing their injuries and adding their own stories to the growing legend of Uku. Even the most respected elders in the village had come to accept that Uku was a force of nature best left undisturbed. When she walked through the marketplace, people would part before her like waves before the bow of a ship. Her presence commanded not just attention, but a kind of fearful respect that was usually reserved for powerful chiefs or dangerous animals. The mystery of Yuku's hatred for men became one of the village's most discussed topics, though only in hushed whispers and never within her hearing. Some said she had been cursed by a spurned suitor, others claimed she had made a pact with spirits who had filled her with unnatural strength. But no one knew the truth, and Uku kept her secrets locked behind those bright eyes, guarded by her fierce reputation and unwavering determination to keep all men at arm's length, or preferably even further. On a bustling market day in Abaka, the air thick with the scent of spices and the hum of traders' voices, an incident occurred that would be retold for weeks to come. Uku was moving through the crowded marketplace, her face set in its usual stern expression as she selected vegetables from a vendor's stall. The crowd parted around her as always, but one young man, new to the village and distracted by the market's chaos, made the grave mistake of bumping into her. Time seemed to freeze as Yuku's hand flew through the air. The crack of her palm against his cheek echoed across the marketplace, silencing all other sounds. The young man's eyes widened in terror as his hand flew to his reddening cheek. "I am sorry," he stammered, backing away before turning to flee into the crowd. The market slowly resumed its activities, but the whispers had already begun. "That's Uku for you," they said. "She shows no mercy." Yet despite her fearsome reputation, or perhaps because of it, suitors continued to approach Uku. They came bearing gifts and sweet words, each believing he would be the one to soften her heart. The village watched as man after man left Yuku's presence nursing bruises and wounded pride. Even the chief's son, emboldened by his status and his father's position, tried his luck. "She wouldn't dare reject my son," the chief had boasted. But Uku cared nothing for status or position. When the chief's son attempted to charm her, she responded with a punch so powerful it sent two of his teeth flying. He returned home with a swollen face and a valuable lesson about Yuku's indifference to rank. But perhaps the most telling incident occurred one hot afternoon by the stream. Uku had gone to fetch water, her clay pot balanced expertly on her head. The path was treacherous, worn smooth by countless feet, and even Yuku's sure steps couldn't prevent what happened next. Her foot slipped on a loose stone, sending her crashing to the ground. The pot shattered, and pain shot through her ankle. A farmer working nearby saw her fall and rushed to help, his intentions purely charitable. But as he bent down to examine her injured foot, Yuku's fist connected with his jaw with devastating force. "Don't you dare touch me!" She roared, her eyes blazing with fury. The farmer, holding his throbbing face, tried to explain he meant only to help, but Yuku's rage was already unleashed. He retreated quickly, leaving her by the stream, her foot still bleeding, but her dignity, in her mind, intact. The word of this incident spread quickly through Abaka, and people shook their heads in wonder. Even when injured, even when faced with genuine kindness, Yuku's hatred of men remained unshakable. The village wondered what could have happened to make her this way, but Yuku kept her secrets, and her fists remained ready for any man who dared come too close. In the midst of Yuku's reign of terror against male admirers, an unexpected suitor emerged, the village prince himself. Unlike the others who saw only her beauty, the prince found himself captivated by something deeper. It wasn't just Yuku's striking appearance that drew him, it was the fire in her spirit, the unwavering independence that set her apart from every other woman he had ever known. The prince approached his courtship with careful calculation, unlike the brash men who had come before him. He began sending gifts to Yuku's home, not the usual trinkets that other suitors had tried, but thoughtful offerings. Fine cloths dyed in rich colors she favored, rare fruits from distant lands, and delicate jewelry crafted by master artisans. Each gift was delivered with respect, without demanding her immediate attention or response. To the village's amazement, Yuku didn't immediately reject these offerings. While she didn't exactly welcome them with open arms, she didn't send them back either. The prince, encouraged by this small victory, began to visit her personally. He would come at respectful hours, always maintaining a careful distance, speaking softly and never making sudden movements. Like a man approaching a wild deer, he understood that any wrong move could shatter the fragile peace. The villagers watched in fascination as Yuku began to tolerate the prince's presence. They would sometimes be seen walking together, though always with space between them. Yuku's face remained serious, but she didn't chase him away with her fists as she had done with countless others. Whispers spread through Abaka. Could the prince be the one to finally breach the walls around Yuku's heart? The prince himself began to believe he was making progress. After weeks of careful attention and measured distance, he felt confident enough to take a bold step. One afternoon, as they walked by the stream, where the water flowed gentle and cool, he made his fatal mistake. Perhaps it was the peaceful setting, or the fact that Yuku hadn't struck him yet that gave him false courage. Whatever the reason, he reached out to take her hand. The change in Yuku was instant and terrifying. Her eyes, which had been almost peaceful, suddenly blazed with familiar fury. Before the prince could withdraw his hand, her fist connected with his chest with devastating force. The blow knocked the air from his lungs, but Yuku wasn't finished. Her fists flew in a fury of strikes, each one finding its mark with brutal precision. The prince's guards, who had been watching from a distance, rushed forward in horror as their master crumpled to the ground. By the time they reached him, his face was swollen and bloody, his fine clothes torn and dirty. They lifted his semi-conscious form carefully, their faces pale with shock at seeing their prince so thoroughly defeated. As they carried him back to the palace, Yuku stood by the stream, her chest heaving, her fists still clenched. In her mind, she hadn't just struck the prince, she had struck at every man who had ever tried to control her, to own her, to break her spirit. Even as she watched them disappear down the path, she felt no remorse, only the familiar bitter satisfaction of maintaining her independence at any cost. The news of the prince's beating spread through Abaka like wildfire, igniting fear and speculation in its wake. When the king's messengers arrived at Yuku's door with a royal summons, the village held its collective breath. None had ever dared to challenge Yuku's violence before, but surely even she couldn't escape the consequences of attacking the crown prince. The palace courtyard filled quickly on the appointed day. Villagers pressed against each other, jostling for the best view of what promised to be an unprecedented confrontation. The air was thick with tension and whispered predictions. Some believed Yuku would finally be humbled, while others wondered if she would dare to challenge the king himself. When Yuku appeared, her entrance silenced the crowd. She walked through the parting sea of people with the same unwavering confidence she had always shown, as if she were approaching a market stall rather than royal judgment. Her head was held high, her steps measured and deliberate. Several of the men she had previously beaten unconsciously touched their healed bruises as she passed, remembering their own encounters with her fury. The king sat upon his throne, his face dark with barely contained rage. His son, the prince, stood to his side, his face still bearing the marks of Uku's fury. The contrast between father and son, one untouched and powerful, the other beaten and humbled, made the gravity of the situation clear to all who watched. "How dare you lay hands on my son?" the king's voice boomed across the courtyard, making several villagers flinch. But Uku didn't move. She stood before the throne, her stance neither submissive nor aggressive, but somehow both defiant and dignified. The king's questions continued, each one more forceful than the last. "Speak, girl. Explain yourself." But Uku remained silent, her eyes fixed straight ahead, her expression unreadable. The crowd watched in amazed horror at her continued defiance. Even in the face of royal authority, she refused to bend. The tension in the courtyard grew unbearable as the king's fury mounted. His face darkened further, his hands gripping the arms of his throne until his knuckles whitened. Those closest to him could see the vein pulsing in his temple as his patience wore thin. "This is your last chance," he warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Explain your actions or face the consequences." Something shifted in Yuko's expression then. A crack appeared in her carefully maintained facade. Her eyes, usually hard as stone, began to glisten. The villagers leaned forward, sensing a change in the air. For the first time, they saw something different in their fierce warrior vulnerability. Yuku's voice, when it finally came, was soft but clear, carrying across the silent courtyard like a leaf on the wind. "My father," she began, and those two words held such pain that even the king's anger seemed to falter. The story that had been locked inside her for so long was finally about to break free, and with it the truth about why she had become the woman they all feared. Tears began to roll down Yuku's cheeks as she spoke, each word carrying the weight of years of suppressed pain. "My father," she continued, her voice trembling but growing stronger, "was supposed to protect us. Instead, he turned our home into a prison of fear." The courtyard fell silent as Yuku painted a picture of her childhood home. She described how her father would return each evening, his presence casting a shadow of terror over their household. Her mother, once vibrant and loving, would shrink into herself, trying to become invisible. But invisibility never worked for long. He would find reasons, Yuku said, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. The food was too hot or too cold. The house wasn't clean enough. Or sometimes there was no reason at all. Just his fists and his rage and my mother's cries. The villagers listened in horror as Yuku described the final terrible day. Her mother had been carrying new life within her, a sibling Yuku had dreamed of meeting. "It was such a small thing," she whispered, her voice breaking. She had forgotten to add salt to his soup. He beat her until she fell. She lost a baby that day, and soon after she lost her own life too. But Yuku's story of horror didn't end with her father's death. When she was sent to live with her uncles, she discovered that cruelty toward women ran deep in her family's blood. Her uncles' homes were no safer than her father's had been. They brought women home like they were bringing cattle to market, Yuku spat, anger now mixing with her grief. Different faces, different names, but always the same story. Women forced to submit, to obey, to endure. Their wives lived in constant fear, just as my mother had. She described nights filled with screams and pleas, days watching her aunts apply herbs to their bruises, trying to hide the evidence of their husband's brutality. Young Uku watched it all, her heart hardening with each passing day, each new act of cruelty she witnessed. "I saw how they broke women's spirits," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "How they used their strength to make women feel weak and worthless. Each time a woman raised her voice to protest, she was silenced with violence. Each time she tried to stand up for herself, she was beaten down." Finally, Yuku raised her eyes to meet the king's gaze directly. "So I made a vow," she declared, her voice ringing with determination. "No man would ever have that power over me. No man would ever make me feel small or weak. I couldn't save my mother. I couldn't help those other women. But I could make sure that I would never suffer their fate." The courtyard remained deathly quiet as her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of generations of suffering and the fierce determination born from it. As Yuku's last words echoed through the palace courtyard, a profound transformation began to sweep through the gathered crowd. The villagers who had long feared and misunderstood her now saw her in a completely different light. Her fierce reputation, once a source of confusion and fear, suddenly made perfect sense. The men in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, many lowering their heads in shame. Some remembered their own harsh words to their wives, their quick tempers, their wisdoms. Others thought of times they had witnessed abuse and remained silent. Uku's story held up a mirror to their own behavior, and many didn't like what they saw reflected back. The women of Abaka stood straighter, drawing strength from Uku's courage. Many had suffered in silence, bearing their own burdens of fear and pain. In Uku, they saw not just a warrior, but a symbol of resistance against the cruelty they had endured. Her fists had fought not just for herself, but for all of them. The prince, still bearing the marks of Uku's fury, stepped forward. His face showed not anger, but deep remorse. "I thought I could tame you," he admitted, his voice carrying across the hushed courtyard. "I now see that was my greatest mistake. Your strength isn't something to be tamed, it's something to be respected." His words, sincere and humble, marked the beginning of a new understanding. The king rose from his throne, his earlier anger transformed into something else entirely. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of law and change. From this day forward, he declared, "No man in Abaka shall raise his hand against a woman. Those who do will face severe punishment." His eyes turned to Uku's uncles, who tried to shrink into the crowd, starting with those who have already caused so much pain. As weeks passed, the village of Abaka underwent a remarkable transformation. Women began to speak up, their voices growing stronger each day. Men learned to listen, to respect, to understand that true strength lay not in dominance but in partnership. Uku's uncles faced justice for their crimes, serving as a powerful reminder that the old ways would no longer be tolerated. Most surprising of all was Uku's own transformation. As the village changed around her, the hardness in her heart began to soften, not into weakness, but into a different kind of strength. The prince, true to his word, approached her with genuine respect and understanding. Their courtship this time was built not on attempts to control or change each other, but on mutual respect and shared values. When Uku finally agreed to marry the prince, it wasn't because she had been conquered or tamed. Instead, it was a choice made from strength, a decision to trust in the possibility of change and healing. Their wedding became a symbol of Abaka's transformation, a celebration not just of love, but of respect, equality, and the power of understanding. Uku's journey from a feared village outcast to a respected leader became a story told for generations, teaching valuable lessons about strength, healing, and the importance of standing up against injustice. In the years that followed Uku's revelation and the transformation of Abaka, her story became woven into the fabric of village life. Mothers would gather their children in the cool of the evening, the soft glow of oil lamps illuminating their faces, and begin, "Let me tell you about the woman who changed our village forever." They spoke of a beauty that was more than skin deep, of bright eyes that had seen too much pain and smooth skin that housed an unbreakable spirit. They told of her fierce reputation, not as something to fear, but as a reminder of the strength it takes to stand against injustice. The tales of her battles, once whispered in fear, were now recounted with understanding and respect. Grandmothers would lean in close to their granddaughters and say, "Before Uku, women in our village lived in shadows, afraid to speak, afraid to stand tall. But she showed us that our strength is not measured by our ability to endure pain in silence, but by our courage to speak against it." Young girls would listen, wide-eyed, learning that being strong didn't mean being hard, and that healing didn't mean forgetting. The men of the village passed down their own lessons to their sons. Remember, they would say, true strength lies not in your fists, but in your heart's capacity for respect and understanding. They taught their boys that Uku's story wasn't just about a woman's fury, but about the devastating consequences of treating others as less than human. In the marketplace, where Uku had once slapped a man for daring to touch her, women now walked with confidence, their voices strong as they bargained and traded. By the stream, where she had once rejected help in her pain, men and women now worked together, helping each other without fear or suspicion. The palace, where she had finally revealed her truth, became a symbol of justice and equality. The prince and Uku's marriage became more than just a royal union, it became a living testament to the possibility of change. People pointed to how they ruled together, neither above the other, making decisions with mutual respect and shared wisdom. Their love story wasn't one of conquest or submission, but of two strong spirits finding harmony in equality. As seasons turned and years passed, new challenges arose in Abaka, as they do in all places. But whenever conflict threatened to tear the community apart, someone would invariably say, "Remember Yuku's tale." These words became a reminder that deepest wounds can heal, that understanding can bridge the widest gaps, and that true strength often comes from the most painful experiences. And so Yuku's legacy lived on, not just as a story of one woman's journey from trauma to healing, but as a beacon of hope for all who suffered in silence. Her tale taught that strength comes in many forms: in the power to fight back, yes, but also in the courage to be vulnerable, in the wisdom to understand, and in the capacity to transform pain into positive change. In Abaka, they say that on quiet nights, when the moon is full and the air is still, you can feel the echo of Yuku's strength in the village's very foundations, a reminder that one person's courage to speak their truth can change not just their own story, but the stories of generations to come.